For my supermarket tour, I chose Chapter 2, which covered the produce section. I picked the produce aisle because of our class discussion on the second food revolution that took place after World War II. This food revolution turned food into a commodity, with the goal of mass production to provide for a global economy. Instead of food being viewed as sustenance, it is now viewed as a product to be traded, like silver or gold. The aspect of the lecture that intrigued me the most was the discussion on the relationship between food and fuel. I never thought about agricultural production relying so heavily on fuel. For machinery, production, and transportation. The most unsettling aspect of our reliance on this finite resource of fossil fuels is the negative impact on our environment. Due to globalization, food is imported thousands of kilometers away. And in the chapter 2, it said, quote, "Imported foods create more than their own weight in greenhouse gas emissions during transport alone," end quote. I wanted to learn more about the production of produce theoretically through the reading and practically through the observation in the supermarket. The supermarket I chose was Loblaws in my local area at 301 Moore Avenue in East York. I chose this one because it's the supermarket I shop in with my family, and I've been going there since I was a kid. In the section called Food Miles, Jet-Lagged Fruit, in the supermarket tour by Oprah Reading, they referred to food miles as, quote, "the distance that food travels to get from where it is produced to where it is consumed," end quote. On average, the North American meal travels 2,400 kilometers from field to table. Unfortunately, most Canadians are so removed from food production that we don't realize the fruits and veggies on our plates are grown thousands of kilometers away. I don't think many Canadians realize that food security is so dependent on the energy derived from fossil fuels, including gasoline, diesel, and natural gas. It's required in large quantities at basically every stage of our food system. Personally, before taking this course, I bought produce based on price. I never considered the negative impact food miles had on our environment. Furthermore, the relationship between food and fuel means that the price of oil affects the price of food, which we are going to see in this next clip. From PBS.
In the same way where the era of cheap fuel is ending, by no coincidence, the era of cheap food is probably ending, because this food system is so dependent on fossil fuel. The other reason that food prices have gone up, though, is because this food system is so entirely dependent on fossil fuel. So that when you see this spike in fuel prices that we've had, lo and behold, fertilizer prices go up. Diesel for your tractor goes up. The food processing costs go up. If it takes 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to produce 1 calorie of food energy, well, in such a system, oil prices are going to have a huge impact on the price of food. And that's the other thing we've seen happen.
In 2008, this took place when oil prices rose, and there was an increase in food prices that caused turmoil, riots, and civil unrest in countries such as Egypt, Haiti, Mexico, and Yemen, to name a few. So when I entered Loblaws, I was not surprised to see an international produce section. From lettuce, tomatoes, oranges, apples, bananas, and pears were grown all over the world. And specifically, most of the produce I saw was from the U.S., but the other countries that were there were Spain, Costa Rica, Chile, Portugal, China, Italy, and Mexico. There were several produce that were Canadian grown, or more specifically Ontario grown, yet I was still surprised to see that the majority of the produce was from the international market. As I said before, I really only focused on price when I was shopping for produce, my fruits and veggies. I never really paid attention to where it was coming from or thought of the impact it would have on my environment. As I was browsing the produce aisle, The pear section really stood out to me, as I noticed that there's so many different types of pears that came from around the world. The pears came from the US, Chile, Portugal, China, Canada, and Italy. I decided to investigate the food miles of these pears and found interesting results. Unfortunately, the supermarket wasn't specific to where the food was made and the region of it, so I had to do some investigation. And for the American pears, according to the United States Department of Agriculture, the vast majority of pears are grown in Washington. And therefore, I decided to calculate the food miles for American pears from Washington. There were 4 types of American pears, and that was the red pear, the Bartlett pear, the d'Anjou pear, and the pear Bosc. In order to transport those pears from the capital of Washington, which is Olympia, it would be a 40-hour drive or 4,233 kilometers. The next pear comes from Chile, and the capital of Chile is called Santiago. So from Santiago to Toronto, the pears, which is called the pears Farell, travel 8,613 kilometers. The pear Rocco from Portugal was 5,722 kilometers away from Toronto. The Asian yellow pear from China, which capital is Beijing, was the furthest from Toronto at 10,583 kilometers. And finally, the pears Abate Fatale from Rome, Italy, was 7,077 kilometers from Toronto. When tracking these food miles of these different types of pears from around the world, it really opened my eyes to how far they're coming from. It's one thing to think of Italy or China as being these foreign countries, but when you see a concrete number in the thousands of kilometers away, that was really jarring, especially with the fact that food miles has such a negative impact on the environment. How does this produce, transported from thousands of kilometers away, stay fresh and look fresh? The answer? Pesticides.
Pesticides have improved over time and are currently regulated by strict safety standards, but they still have the potential to pollute soil and water, impact wildlife, and even harm us. So considering all these risks, why do we continue using pesticides?
And looking around the supermarket, that's exactly what I saw. Fruit and vegetables that looked flawless, that looked like they were handpicked by the gods. I always thought that buying food at the supermarket was safe. But is it really?
No, God! No, God, please, no! No! No!
After hearing all this information, you might feel overwhelmed, because I did, and I wasn't really sure what to do. I want to be healthy and eat the right foods, and I always thought that was through fruits and vegetables. But now I'm questioning that. Fortunately, there are some steps to take that will reduce your exposure to pesticides. For instance, buying organic. In Canada, on June 30th, 2009, the Organic Products Regulation became law, and there's new standards around organic foods, such as only products that have at least 95% organic content are allowed to be advertised as organic, and in organic operations, the following products are banned: genetically engineered seeds, materials and products, synthetic pesticides, artificial fertilizers. In addition, you can also buy local, as they have fewer preserving agents or fungicides because their food miles are lower and thus don't have to travel as far to reach consumers. More importantly, Canadian produce has only been exposed to pesticides that have been regulated by the government. Foreign produce may have been exposed to banned pesticides in Canada that the consumer is not privy to.